General Hospital spoilers for reveal that Willow is caught in a spiraling emotional storm, one that grows more dangerous with each passing day as she finds herself unable to reconcile the profound emptiness left by Wiley's absence. What began as sorrow and guilt has now curdled into something far more volatile, an obsession born from grief and denial, a compulsive need to prove to herself, and perhaps to the world, that she is still Wiley's mother in more than just biology. The court's decision to strip her of custody shattered more than just a legal tie, it severed her from the very essence of her identity. Without Wiley in her arms, without the rhythms of parenthood that once anchored her, Willow is adrift in a sea of anguish where the only thing keeping her afloat is the imagined possibility of reuniting with him, even if just for a moment. Her days are now consumed with the thought of Wiley. What he might be doing, whether he asks about her, if he still remembers the sound of her voice. She replays old videos of him laughing, saying, "Mommy," building block towers, or splashing in the bath. Each memory has become both a balm and a blade, healing and hurting simultaneously. As the custody battle wages on with no resolution in sight, the pressure builds inside her like a ticking clock. Her mental health, already fragile from the trauma of losing her children and the overwhelming pressure of trying to navigate a world that no longer offers her maternal purpose, continues to deteriorate. She can't sleep. She can't eat. The walls of her new home feel foreign and cold, devoid of the warmth that Wiley once brought. Every toy she kept, every photo on the fridge, now feels like a cruel reminder of what she lost. But what's most alarming is the way Willow has started to rationalize her intrusive thoughts. She tells herself it's okay to walk by Wiley's school just to see him from afar. She convinces herself that if she just happens to be at the Metro Court pool during his swim lessons, it's not crossing any boundaries, it's love. She believes that any opportunity, no matter how small or inappropriate, is a chance to reconnect, to rekindle the bond they once shared. This emotional erosion is one of the most terrifying developments in her storyline, not because Willow is dangerous, but because she is vulnerable, so desperately, heartbreakingly vulnerable to her own spiraling emotions and to outside forces who may exploit them. Michael, who was once her safe harbor, is now the embodiment of her betrayal, the face of the man who took her children and replaced her with control, authority, and legal maneuvering. Her resentment toward him simmers beneath the surface, but it is tempered by a helplessness that keeps her from striking out. She doesn't want revenge, she wants redemption. But the more Michael keeps Wiley out of reach, the more she feels like a stranger to her own child. And so, her mind begins crafting plans, scenarios, fantasies, any avenue that might lead to Wiley once again recognizing her not as a woman he's been told to fear, but as the mother who once soothed him to sleep. Even Drew, whose promises of legal strategy and eventual reunification once felt comforting, now seems distant and clinical. He tells her to be patient, to trust the system, to believe in their case, but Willow doesn't want to wait anymore. Patience has become poison. Her maternal instinct, visceral, immediate, raw, demands action. Every day without Wiley is a day that her bond with him fades in his mind, and she can't bear the idea that he might one day stop calling her mommy altogether. What Willow is experiencing isn't just the heartbreak of a mother separated from her child, it is a psychological unraveling that threatens to destroy everything she has tried so hard to protect. Her every breath is haunted by the scent of Wiley's hair, the weight of his tiny body, the sound of his laugh. She is no longer fighting a courtroom battle, she is battling the ghosts of motherhood, the fading echoes of a love she cannot hold. Her obsession is not malicious, it is born from love. But it is growing into something dangerous because it is becoming detached from reality. And in this state, Willow is at risk. Not just of making impulsive decisions, but of being taken advantage of by those who know exactly how to manipulate her pain. The threat isn't just that she might show up uninvited to one of Wiley's swim lessons and cause a scene, it's that she might become so consumed by the idea of reclaiming her motherhood that she takes a risk she cannot walk back. This isn't just grief. It's obsession. It's desperation. It's a mother's mind on fire with longing, and no one, perhaps not even Willow herself, knows what she might do next. As the lines blur between love and instability, between hope and delusion, Willow's story becomes one of the most emotionally raw and dangerous narratives in Port Charles. And the question that haunts it all is devastating in its simplicity. What happens when a mother's love becomes her undoing? The truth had always been fragile in Port Charles, but never more so than now, as the emotional weight of Wiley's memories threatens to dismantle the entire structure Willow and Drew built to shield themselves from consequence. At the center of this brewing chaos is not a scheming adult, not a determined lawyer or a vengeful rival, but a child. Wiley, wide-eyed and soft-spoken, whose heart remains pure, but whose mind has become an unintentional archive of whispered arguments, half-truths, and disturbing contradictions that not even he fully understands. Yet what he knows, what he remembers, could bring every lie, every manipulation, every secret to its knees. Willow never imagined it would come to this. Her descent from a devoted, protective mother to a woman grasping for legal control through a marriage of desperation with Drew had already begun to eat away at her conscience. But it was her increasingly erratic behavior, moments of blank confusion, spontaneous tears, and overwhelming anxiety, that signaled something darker. Her love for Wiley had not diminished, but it had evolved into something more volatile, obsession. She would stand outside the Quartermain gate, hoping to catch even a glimpse of him. She would leave toys on the front steps like messages in a bottle, as if he might somehow know they were from her, even without a name. Her nights were sleepless, her days were a blur of paranoia and fear. The only person who saw how far she was falling was Sasha. And yet even Sasha, fragile in her own right, could not stop Willow from spiraling deeper. Willow's emotions had taken over, and her longing for Wiley had morphed into a compulsion that even Drew found impossible to manage. What began as a plan to legally regain custody was now unraveling into impulsive behavior that bordered on dangerous. During a swim class at Metro Court, Willow broke through a crowd of parents just to approach Wiley, speaking to him gently, desperately, before Michael could intervene. The child looked at her with a mixture of recognition and fear. A look that broke Willow's heart, but one she could not deny. She had become a stranger to her own son. Michael, for all his bitterness and anger, did not wish to see Willow destroyed. But he could no longer pretend that she was stable. Especially when Wiley, in his own confused way, began speaking about Mommy's secrets. He told Brooke Lynn about overhearing Drew say something about the judge being taken care of. He mentioned a time when Mommy cried in the closet for hours and told him not to tell anyone. And worst of all, he described a late-night conversation in which Drew warned Willow that if she didn't keep it together, they'd lose both kids for good. These stories, innocent as they were, sent alarm bells ringing for Michael, and not just as a father, but as someone who had watched this type of deception before with other members of his fractured family. He began recording Wiley's words. Not to manipulate him, but to protect him. What he heard filled him with rage and a crushing sadness. The child was living in fear. He didn't understand why his mother was crying, why his stepfather was yelling, why he couldn't see his sister without secrecy. He only knew that something was wrong, and he felt responsible. Michael's instincts, once dulled by grief, were now razor sharp. He realized that Wiley didn't just know too much, he was suffering because of it. He made the difficult decision to bring in a child psychologist. Quietly, he began legal motions to block Willow from any unsupervised contact with either of the children until the court could reevaluate her mental state. But Drew, sensing that Michael was closing in, doubled down. He began exerting more control over Willow, reminding her that their marriage was the only reason she hadn't been deemed unfit. He made subtle threats. If she exposed him, she would lose everything. He accused her of being unstable, irrational, incapable of mothering. And Willow, too broken to argue, submitted. She began to isolate herself even further, convinced that she was the problem, that she had failed as a mother, and that Wiley's distancing was her punishment. Her dreams became nightmares. Daisy's cries echoed in her ears even when she wasn't there. And every time she tried to reach out, Drew reminded her that this was the path she chose. Meanwhile, Sasha, who had once seen Drew as a protector, began to suspect otherwise. She noticed how Wiley shrank in his presence. She saw the way Willow flinched when Drew entered a room. And worst of all, she found notes that Willow had written to herself, scrawled confessions, apologies to Wiley, letters to Amelia that would never be sent. Sasha tried to confront Drew, but he brushed her off with cold precision, claiming that Willow was just overwhelmed and needed time. Sasha knew better. And she knew it was only a matter of time before the truth would break through in the most brutal way. The truth came in pieces. Wiley, during a quiet moment with Christina, asked if it was wrong to lie for the people you love. When she asked what he meant, he whispered, "I know Mommy made the man go away. The man with the papers. She said he'd ruin everything." Christina, shaken, told Michael. Michael, already near the edge, realized that the man with the papers might have been a court official, or worse, someone who had been silenced by Drew to manipulate custody proceedings. The implications were staggering. Now Michael faced a horrifying dilemma. To protect Wiley and Amelia, he might have to expose Willow in a way that would devastate her permanently. He might have to prove in court that the woman he once loved had become a threat, not just to herself, but to their children. And in doing so, he would risk breaking her completely. He turned to Jason, who had just returned from his own battles, hoping for guidance. Together, they began planning, not just a legal counterattack against Drew, but an emotional rescue for Willow. They would gather evidence, protect the children, and bring the truth to light, no matter how painful. Because the only thing more dangerous than the lies was letting them fester in the dark. But as they prepared for court, another bombshell emerged. Wiley had drawn a picture in therapy. It showed a figure pushing another into a fire. When asked, he said, "That's Drew. That's what he said he'd do if Mommy talked." Whether literal or metaphorical, it was enough to trigger an emergency intervention. Suddenly, everything accelerated. CPS became involved. The judge called for a reevaluation of all custody and guardianship arrangements. And Drew, cornered and furious, vanished, taking with him whatever final cards he still held. Now, the entire town stands on the brink of unraveling. Wiley, Daisy, Michael, Willow, Sasha, each caught in a storm of consequence and grief. The secrets Wiley held were never meant to come from him, but now that they have, there is no turning back. What remains is the question, will the truth set them free, or destroy them completely? The situation in Port Charles has reached a terrifying boiling point as a new disaster takes hold, one that no one saw coming, and yet in hindsight, all the warning signs were there. Willow, once considered a compassionate and soft-spoken mother, has now begun to lose control in the most harrowing and dangerous way possible. Her fragile state of mind, compounded by the pressure of the custody battle, the betrayal she felt from Michael, and the psychological manipulation inflicted by Drew, has brought her to the edge. And now, in a chilling twist, she has crossed the line, from desperation into dangerous obsession. Willow has taken Wiley. Not just for a fleeting moment of mother-son interaction, but as an act of defiance, driven by a delusional belief that she is rescuing him from a system that has failed them both. In her mind, the courts are corrupt, Michael is a puppet of power and lies, and everyone, from Sasha to Jason to Carly, is part of a conspiracy to keep her from her child. This dangerous delusion has spiraled into a full-blown crisis, and it is no longer just about legal custody, it's about the safety of Wiley. The act was calculated but emotionally charged. Willow waited until a distraction occurred at the Quartermain estate. A moment when Sasha had taken Amelia into the garden and Michael was on a business call. She slipped in quietly, whispering reassurances to Wiley, telling him they were going somewhere safe and where no one can hurt us again. At first, the boy thought it was another short visit. But as she bundled him into the back seat of a car she had hidden in the woods near the estate, the realization slowly dawned on him, this wasn't a visit. This was a kidnapping. By the time Michael noticed Wiley was gone, Willow was already out of range. And the fallout was immediate. Sasha collapsed in tears, blaming herself for letting Willow get too close. Jason sprang into action, pulling surveillance footage, checking highway feeds, and calling in every contact he had from his past WSB days. Carly went straight to the judge, demanding an emergency custody revocation and a warrant for Willow's arrest. But the pain, the emotional devastation. was felt deepest by Michael. His son had been taken. Not by a stranger, but by the woman he once trusted with his heart. A woman now consumed by madness. And yet, what makes this disaster even more horrifying is that Willow truly believes she is doing the right thing. In her mind, she is saving Wiley from a lifetime of lies. She believes Drew was right, that Michael was never going to allow her access again. She believes Sasha turned on her. She believes even the judge was manipulated. Her actions are not those of a calculated criminal, but of a broken mother so twisted by grief and fear that she can no longer distinguish between love and control. Wiley, meanwhile, is confused and scared. Willow is talking to him in whispers, telling him not to cry, telling him they're going on an adventure, but he's old enough now to sense when something is wrong. He asks when they're going home. He asks why Mommy keeps crying when she thinks he's asleep. And most of all, he asks why he can't call Daddy. But Willow says the phone doesn't work, that there are bad people trying to stop them. Wiley begins to retreat inward, silent and withdrawn, his innocence cracking under the weight of his mother's unraveling. This unfolding tragedy is more than a single act of maternal desperation. It is the eruption of months of emotional damage, manipulation, trauma, and unresolved grief. Drew's influence, though now distant, still echoes in Willow's mind. His suggestions that the world was against her, that Michael was brainwashing the children, that the only way to win was to take control, all of it seeded into her during the darkest days of their toxic alliance. Now, poor Charles is gripped by panic. The police are involved. The media is circling. And the people who once pitted Willow now fear her. Jason's hunt for her has become relentless, his stoic mask cracking under the pressure of protecting Michael and finding Wiley before this turns into a tragedy no one can walk back from. Carly, who once defended Willow as a fellow mother, now demands justice with cold fury. Sasha is haunted by the idea that she might have enabled this by not pushing for psychological evaluation sooner. And Michael? He is barely holding it together. His guilt, his fear, his rage, they are colliding all at once. He blames himself for believing in Willow. For letting his guard down. For assuming she would never hurt their child. But the question now is, will this end in redemption, or devastation? Will Willow realize the damage she's done before it's too late, or will she double down and disappear for good? Each passing hour is a gamble. Each decision made by those trying to bring her back into the fold could either save Wiley or shatter him forever. And above it all, one terrifying truth remains. This wasn't a random act. It was the result of a deep, calculated unraveling, a slow-burning disaster that now threatens to consume everyone in its path. Michael was no longer the composed and calculating figure that poor Charles had grown accustomed to. As the full weight of Willow's actions came crashing down, his anger erupted into something far more volatile and personal. It wasn't just about the legal implications anymore. It was about betrayal, about trust shattered beyond repair, and about a father pushed to his absolute breaking point. Michael had given Willow the benefit of the doubt far longer than anyone else. He had tried to see the pain behind her missteps, to forgive the emotional instability as a consequence of Drew's manipulation and the trauma she had suffered. But now, as he stood before an empty nursery, his son taken, his family in ruins, Michael felt nothing but fury. What Willow had done wasn't just a violation of custody, it was a declaration of war. She had taken Wiley without permission, emotionally traumatized the boy, and endangered his safety, all because she couldn't accept the outcome of a court ruling. And to make matters worse, she had done so in the name of motherly love, twisting a sacred bond into something possessive and dangerous. For Michael, this wasn't the Willow he once knew. This was someone unrecognizable. A woman driven by delusion and desperation, unwilling to face the consequences of her own spiraling decisions. The situation triggered one of the most dramatic shifts in Michael's demeanor that anyone had ever seen. Gone was the empathetic co-parent who had tried to find compromise and understanding. In his place stood a man hardened by betrayal, ready to retaliate not just with legal might but with unrelenting vengeance. He immediately contacted his legal team and instructed them to file for a permanent revocation of Willow's parental rights. He demanded that every action she had taken in the past 6 months, from marrying Drew to the manipulation of Wiley's emotions, be documented and weaponized in court. This wasn't just about protecting Wiley anymore. This was about ensuring Willow could never again hold power over their lives. Michael had already lost months of peace, of stability, and now nearly his son. He wasn't going to lose anything else. But Michael's fury wasn't only legal, it was deeply emotional. Every interaction he had with Willow from this point forward carried a venomous edge. When they finally came face to face again, the air between them crackled with tension. Willow tried to explain, her voice trembling, that she had acted out of love. But Michael's glare said everything. This was not love. This was selfishness disguised as devotion, a reckless act masked as maternal instinct. He accused her of putting Wiley's emotional well-being second to her own pride, and worse, of dragging a child into the chaos she had created. Willow, cornered and unraveling, retaliated by hurling accusations of her own. She blamed Michael for alienating her, for poisoning Wiley against her, and for using his influence to twist the court's perception. But her words only fueled Michael's resolve. To him, they were proof that she hadn't changed. She was still clinging to delusions, still trying to rewrite reality instead of facing it. What followed was an intense and escalating battle. Friends and family were forced to choose sides. Carly stood firmly behind her son, while Sasha, conflicted but loyal, warned Willow that she was spiraling into self-destruction. Jason, always the protector, focused on safeguarding Wiley but couldn't ignore how far Willow had fallen. The Quartermain estate, once a place of uneasy peace, became a war zone of legal filings, court summons, supervised visits, and emotional landmines. Michael, meanwhile, began laying the groundwork for a future without Willow in their lives. He hired therapists to help Wiley cope with the trauma. He moved up plans to move the children into a new wing of the house, away from reminders of the past. And quietly, he began compiling evidence of Drew's influence, hoping to expose how deeply that toxic alliance had infected Willow's judgment. What had begun as a custody dispute had now transformed into a full-blown emotional war, one with no easy resolutions and no guarantee of healing. Michael and Willow had once loved each other. They had once shared dreams of a united family. But those dreams had been crushed under the weight of lies, betrayal, and trauma. Now, all that remained was a battlefield strewn with broken trust and the haunting reality that some wounds were too deep to ever fully heal. And as Michael prepared for their next court appearance, his heart hardened by the wreckage of the past, one thought echoed louder than the rest: Willow had declared war, and he intended to win.